Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grief Recovery. This is week number 2, and today we're going to be discussing quite a few different things. I'm going to go ahead and begin. I'm going to actually read chapter 2 to all of us out of the Grief Recovery handbook because there's so many pieces to this that are so extraordinary for us to begin the process. So I'm going to start here by talking a little bit about the confusion in the stages of grief. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified 5 emotional stages of a dying person. And what those 5 emotional stages were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and ultimately acceptance. These were found when they were consulting with a person who had been terminally diagnosed with an illness that was ultimately going to take their life, a form of cancer. I can really relate to that subject, and I'm going to share a little bit about my story before I read about this, because in my 20s, I actually suffered with cancer. I spent almost 3 years battling cancer in my life. So I know that I spent a lot of time in that space of denial, absolute denial, to the point where somehow I miraculously healed my own body. The doctors had informed me that it had gone far beyond the levels in which that I was suffering with were not going to really have a good outturn. They informed me that ultimately the form of cancer that I had from the molar pregnancy was going to go from my uterus to my lungs and then ultimately to my brain. I didn't have time to have cancer. And that is what I told cancer. I don't have time for you. Now, not everyone's story has been as amazing as mine, and I have a lot to be grateful for because I've lost many to cancer. And cancer is an uncomfortable condition for anyone to face. So my story has a victory. And maybe because of my story, you can too. I'll share a little bit about that story. When I was standing in the doctor's office, completely being informed that I had this form of cancer that had just been removed, but the levels that were still in my body were going to continue to spread. They discussed all the different treatments and all the pathways that we could take. And I remember sitting there, and all those words were just going past me. I wasn't even really able to accept what they were saying to me. I remember sitting there, and as the words were just going past me, I decided that because I couldn't hear them, I guess my hearing, after all, is a superpower. But I remember sitting there and thinking, I don't have time. I don't have time for cancer. What do I need to do to make this not a reality? I was a single mother. I was dealing with a lot of domestic violence and other things at the time. I was in a space that was very dangerous in my life, and they told me I was going to die. And being a single mom, I knew that there was another soul that I was responsible for. I didn't have time to die. And I made that my mantra. Every time the doctors turned to me and told me, Darla, this is getting worse. We're going to have to do this. And I said, well, I understand, but my body needs to come back into alignment because I don't have time for this. That became the words that I kept repeating. I don't have time for cancer. Cancer and I are not going to meet. The power of my very thoughts of not having time because I had a little baby boy that needed a loving mom who was going to help him through the horrific things that we had to experience. I knew that he could not be left alone. I knew that there was no one else that had the strength to help him through the things that he was experiencing. And I couldn't fail him. So in that, I decided to make it a journey that every day that the doctor said that I was going to die, I was going to tell them that I didn't have time for that. And after a very long, extensive, almost 3 years of going in for daily blood works, blood draws, checking this, reevaluating, ultrasound after ultrasound, to every possible thing that they could do to see what was going on in the time frame, my body produced the healing that it needed. And by the time they were 2 weeks from starting me on chemotherapy, my body decided it was going to regenerate itself and give itself life again. And those levels dropped and dissipated at an extreme rate. And by the date that I was supposed to start chemo, my levels were below the levels that were necessary. I had an extreme victory, but it took me 3 years of going through the process. And that process hurt. It was uncomfortable. It made me feel weak. It made me feel unable. I was limited at one point to only working 2 hours a day because I couldn't be out of bed any longer than that. So I had to figure out how to create a way to get myself back and forth to work, which at the time I had no vehicle, so it required walking and a bus. It required standing for those 2 long hours that made me feel like I was completely wiped out by the time I was done. But I found an employer that would work with my circumstance so that I could make just enough to pay my rent every month. We figured out what the pay rate would be to allow me to work just enough to pay $426 for a tiny studio apartment that my son and I lived in when I was suffering. $426 a month for a 1-room open floor space with a kitchen, a bathroom, a closet, and a room. What seemed at that moment completely exhausting, only making $429 so that I could process that check and have $426 to take to my landlord in a money order, which I had to pay for out of that processing fees. I made it, just barely. I shopped from my mother's kitchen, taking a bag over and taking the stuff that was almost getting ready to go, but she didn't need anymore. And I survived for myself and my son. We never know what we're going to experience and what circumstances are going to come into our life. And grief is one of the hardest things to process. Having illness, death, divorce, loss of a job, betrayal, loss of friends who betrayed us, loss of the children that we love, loss of the lives that we thought we would get to experience, but they were taken too early. Loss of any sort leaves a gaping wound inside our hearts. You're not alone. I walked that road too. I'm going to go ahead now begin reading this chapter. And it's chapter 2 in the Grief Recovery Handbook. Compounding the problem. Grief is difficult enough without adding complications. Unfortunately, many factors can compound our reactions to the loss and limit our recovery. This chapter will alert you to some of the pitfalls that can stall or short circuit your recovery. Confusion about stages. Many people are familiar with the pioneering work of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who identified 5 emotional stages that a dying person may go through after being diagnosed with a terminal illness. She identified the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. One result of Dr. Kubler-Ross's work is that many people now tend to apply the concept of stages to other aspects of human emotion. Grief, which follows death, divorce, and other losses, should not, however, be regarded in terms of stages. The nature and the intensity of feelings caused by a loss relate to the individualities and the uniqueness of the relationship. While the doctor's contributions brought a heightened awareness about the process of dying, her work has been accompanied by some unfortunate collateral damage. Many people, professionals, and the general public alike have attempted to apply her strategies to the emotions that rise after loss. She identified denial as the first stage that follows notification of a terminal illness. Absent other helpful information, her work has been misinterpreted to imply that denial is also the stage the person experiences following a death or a divorce. In all of our years working with grievers, we have yet to be approached by someone who is in denial that a loss had occurred. The very first thing they said to us, my mother died, or my dog died, or my wife divorced me. These statements reflect absolutely no denial of the loss has occurred. If you're reading this book, you're not in denial that you have experienced a loss. Now, you may be in other emotional statuses, but you are aware, if you're listening to this message, if you're listening to this class, you're not in denial. You have accepted that something has happened and you need a process to begin processing. So, taking that part and looking at it, we can identify that yes, there are specifics that everyone experiences. But can we overcome grief? Many have felt they could not because they have not had the tools to begin. Why are they here? To begin, what are they? Is what basically was what I was writing. Sorry. What are those tools? To begin developing those tools to process grief, there is a fail-proof system, but it starts when we choose to decide to work through our experiences and acknowledge our truths in each part of the process. Not everyone starts in the same place in this journey. When it is time to begin for you to recover, we can then begin finding out, are you dealing with some of these other factors that are written about? Where are you on this journey? And then we begin diving into the little details that work for you. So I'm going to go back to the book work, though, here in the handbook, and it talks about anger. What about anger? Much of the literature about grief contends that anger is always a factor in loss. Respectfully, we disagree. Anger is sometimes associated with the circumstances of a loss. It is often a factor in our difficult relationships when less than loved ones, yet the presumption of anger is both incorrect and dangerous. A death often involves no anger at all. One brief account illustrates the point. My 92-year-old grandma, with whom I had a wonderful relationship, became ill and died. Blessedly, it happened quickly, so she did not suffer very much. I am pleased about it. I had just spent time with her and told her how much I cared about her. I'm very happy about it. There was a funeral ceremony that accurately portrayed her. Many people came and talked about her. I loved that. At the funeral, a helpful friend reminded me to say goodbye. I did, and I'm glad, and I'm not angry. This is a true story. If the story hadn't been if it had been different, it would not have created different, it would have created different feelings. If the grandson had not been able to talk to his grandma before she died, he might have been angry at the circumstances that prevented him from doing so. If she had been a less than loved one, he might have been angry that she died before he had a chance to repair the relationship. Please do not believe that anger is an automatic part of unresolved grief. Some grievers will be angry and others won't. But if anger is there, we will find it and complete it. Other things like common responses. While there's no stages of grief, many grievers do experience some common responses. Reduction of concentration, a sense of numbness, disrupted sleep patterns, changed eating habits, and feeling as if you're on the roller coaster of every emotion. One of the things that I have realized when dealing with grief, sometimes we are not expecting where we will be triggered. And what I mean by that is a memory, somebody saying something. It could be the scent of something. It can be the sound of something. Maybe even an activity that you once loved doing now becomes bothersome because it reminds you of the pain you feel from the loss that you've experienced. This is all too so vital and so important to the recovery of the grief that you've suffered. So let's go on and continue. We're going to be going into the part where I want to talk about there is no absolutes in grief. There's no reactions so universal that all, or even most people, will experience them. There is only one unalterable truth. All relationships are unique. Can we actually come to a place of getting over or overcoming grief? I have to say yes, because I've overcome many griefs in my life. And I hope that this class will assist you in overcoming whatever it was in your life as well. But it all starts when we decide to work through our experiences and acknowledge our truth in each part of this process. Not everyone starts in the same place in this journey. When is it time to begin to recover? Well, when it's time that you're ready. And the fact that you've come to the grief recovery course tells me you're ready. If you had not been ready when seeing this, it would have been an automatic restriction. There would have been reasons, excuses, and other things that kept you from it. But you chose to invest in yourself. And you chose to show up. Even if you're not present in the class itself, you chose to listen to this recording. You chose to see how you could begin processing. So yes, can we get over or get through it? Yes, we can. But it starts with being patient with ourselves as we begin. What does it say here in the book? Getting over or getting complete. One of the most damaging pieces of misinformation is the idea that you can never get over it. The death of a child. This absolutely incorrect claim has made to parents those child has died, but it also has made in connection with other losses. Grieving parents and others then seek out information and emotions to match the untruth. It is more accurate to ask, is it possible to forget your child? Or, for that matter, your spouse or your parent? Clearly, the answer is no. Not forgetting becomes inaccurately or incorrectly entangled with the idea of not getting over. This crippling idea keeps the griever's heart endlessly internally broken, does not allow for recovery of any kind, and more often than not, severely limits any fond memories associated with the relationship. I want everyone to take a moment and jot down one of your most favorite memories of what brought you into that connection. If it be your pet, if it be a loss of a child, and the experiences that you did experience, whether or not if it was during gestational times, think back to the joy of feeling them flutter. They were alive. They were growing. Remember the joys that you have and begin realizing that that is really important for you. And it's okay if you cry. It's okay if it hurts. The one thing in the world, we want to all be in this perfect status. Everyone needs to be tending their emotional state and maintaining a space where everyone can function together. But when grief happens and arises, we can't always connect to those feel good feelings because right now we don't feel good. It hurts. So when everyone else around us is enjoying life, we feel like we died with them. We feel like we lost everything with it, that we have no direction anymore. So the important of grief recovery is to come together with one another so that we can share our stories, become vulnerable, and begin learning how to live life again, just differently. Because those people, those circumstances, and those things still exist. They exist in an energy now instead of reality. We can no longer have tangible, or experience anything from that energy any longer. And that's what we are feeling. It's like the cord of someone when they're our loved ones or our children or those pets. They all have a cord and they have all connected to our heart. And those unexpected losses that come along the way, or those situations when others made decisions that we were not ready to receive because we were truly invested, because we lost those relationships. What happens is they pull out and they leave this huge void within. So what I want to do today is I want to bring in some energy healing to this place. So if you guys are ready to accept some healing today, energetically, I just want to close off the hole inside the soul. This doesn't separate you from the memory. It doesn't make you forget. It doesn't cause anything except some relief. And if you're ready to start beginning to feel a little relief, that's all I'm asking. Just say, yes, I accept and I receive. Make it audible so it can be heard by you and the spirits. And outside of that, you can begin to receive. Now, this may take many attempts. This may happen instantly. Each individual will be different. But I want you to take and center yourself to your heart. I want you to feel your heart as it's beating inside your chest. I want you to get connected and familiar. And just get still, feeling as your heart is beating. As time is still ticking, that those you once loved that were right there next to you, accept that they're no longer there. But energetically, when they departed from this world, they took and ripped out from inside of you that part of connection you were not expecting to release. And that void is what I want to speak into. I want to bring the soothing, healing, restoration power into your soul, into those spaces that feel vacant and no longer whole. God didn't have time to make nobodies. He only had time to make somebody. And you certainly are someone. So out of from above, so below, bring in a healing in through the crown, down through the third eye, into the throat, and down into the heart with a deep breath in and exhale. Right here, right now, in this place, I want you to remember the most amazing moment you had with that individual. And remember that love is the true key to bringing restoration, healing power to everything, including your heart. I want you to take in another deep cleansing breath in and exhale. Breathing in life, exhaling pain, bringing in acceptance, exhaling sorrow, inhaling love, exhaling hurt. Inhaling joy, exhaling resistance. And right now, with your hands still on your chest, I want you to go ahead and imagine that there's a warm, warm, warm sensation. Feels just like something through the pot holders coming out of the oven. You can feel that warmth. You can smell that goodness. You feel nourished, restored, replenished. like a soothing balm of aloe vera placed upon the edges of this wound, feeling relief, peace, and freedom, accepting that this is part of life. For in the seasons, some will perish, some will come into this world, and you will be restored. As one exits, another arrives. The energy is endless, coming and going, ebbing and flowing here and there. And the stream of consciousness is always with us as this transition is happening. If any of you have anyone that you wish to say goodbye, this is your place. Tell them you love them and thank them for all the experiences that they brought to you. This is your pets. This is the life that you had that was taken away. This is those that you loved, those that you were to have in this world that ultimately were not able to have because it was taken too soon. Breathing in and out the oceanic breaths. Breathing in like the waves coming in and crashing on the tides. Breathing in and breathing, bringing that restoration power. When you're ready, wiggle your fingers and your toes. Come back to the here and now. And I'm going to continue. After getting through, when is it time to begin the recovery? Anytime you're ready. And each part's going to be different. And that's acceptable. When is it time to begin to recover? As the book says, earlier we mentioned that a sense of numbness and reduction of ability to concentrate are typical for grievers. In spite of those responses, grievers are willing to talk about the circumstances of the loss and to review the relationship that they had. These review occurs with all losses. Consequently, effective grief recovery can begin almost immediately. It is very easy to tap into the review and discover a multitude of undeveloped emotional communications. Even the most loving and complete of relationships will end with some incompleteness. The accuracy of our memories is heightened by the loss itself. This can be an ideal opportunity to harvest an incredible collection of memories. Grievers need and want to talk about their losses. It is typical for a family to talk immediately afterwards about a family member who died. It is equally common following a divorce, retirement, pet loss, job loss, or physical changes to talk about the good and the bad experiences within those relationships or events. Talking about loss and about relationships is wonderful and good, but it is generally not enough to allow us to feel complete. We need to take additional steps to help complete the pain we discover as we talk about our relationships. One of the saddest experiences involves people who have signed up to participate in grief recovery or the grief recovery outreach program but didn't appear at the session. Occasionally they call to cancel, saying, "My therapist said I'm not ready to do my grief work yet." Here's a little two-part quiz that graphically answers the question, when do I begin to recover? If you fell down and gashed your leg and the blood was pouring out, would you immediately seek medical attention? Obviously, yes. If the circumstances and the events conspire To break your heart, would you seek attention immediately, or would you allow yourself to bleed to death emotionally? Pick one. Is it ever too soon to begin recovery? No. The first 10 years of our grief recovery careers were devoted to helping funeral directors, those people who do cremations, the clergy, better assist grieving people. Clearly, those professionals are helping grievers in the hours and the days immediately following the death. It is never too soon to address your grief. If we need to at any other time when we get together, if we need to talk about things like suicide, murder, AIDS, and other traumatic circumstances, please do not hesitate to reach out. If you've listened to this message, know that you have some place to turn to, and you can begin today. The G word. An often misused word applies to grief or guilt. At the Grief Recovery Institute, we call it the G word. We almost never introduce that word to grievers because it rarely the right word. A standard painful interaction at the Grief Recovery Institute, grievers. So this is going to be a dialogue. So griever would be, my son committed suicide. I feel so guilty. Myself, as your therapist, did you ever do anything with intent to harm your son? The griever, no. The therapist. The dictionary definition of guilt implies intent to harm. Since you had no intent to harm, can you put the G back in the dictionary? The guilt. You are probably devastated enough by the death of your son. You don't need to add to it by hurting yourself with an innocent word that distorts your feeling. Really? I never thought of it that way, the griever says. The therapist. Are there some things that you wish you had ended different before, better, or more? Oh, yes, replies the griever. Again, here we are with the grief, which is now misconstrued with guilt. Grief and guilt are not the same. But having survivor's remorse, when our children leave before we do, it hurts us on a whole nother level. We thought we were older, we're going to go before them. We know that that's just the normal processes. Generally, their kids deal with their parents passing before the parent deals with the child, or vice versa. The feelings are still going to be the same. Still absolute pain and anguish to lose those that we love. So it's normal to feel the way you feel right now. You just need to be with those who are in the same space as you so that they understand and can relate to your individual thing right now. We're coming close to the end of class, so I want to make sure that I cover everything from today. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about survivor. Because we hear survivor's guilt. We hear survivors, we're still the survivor after, which means that we're still suffering. But what does it say here in the Grief Recovery Handbook? It says, you may have noticed that throughout this book, you have not seen the word survivor. This is intentional. Survivor is intellectually accurate. It implies that the griever is outlives someone else. But we have discovered that the word survivor tends to act as both a definition and a diagnosis, and often keeps people stuck in a dangerous and painful rut. For example, you don't survive someone else's suicide. You may survive if someone tries to murder you, but not when they attempt or commit suicide. More important, the word survivor defines the griever and causes him or her to constantly revisit the circumstances about the loss. Being a survivor often becomes an identity. The strong habit identification with pain can become who the griever is. It is not uncommon for grievers to get more caught up in defining themselves than their pain. So, in other words, what this part really is trying to convey to us is that if we put ourselves in the category as we're surviving, we're going to ultimately continue the same process over and over again and creating a loop within our mind. Instead, we have to come to a place of acceptance, a place of acknowledgement, a place of security, a place of knowing that this too shall pass. One of the best words of advice my mother could have ever given me, Darla, this too shall pass. Making me realize that every situation in my life was temporary, allowed me to begin understanding that no matter what I was facing, this too was temporary. Just as much as I felt bad, I could be like that hefty commercial when it was wimpy, 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 hefty, hefty, hefty. You know, we go from that soft space of feeling less than who we are because of the devastation we just experienced to taking and learning the skills and the tools that are necessary to bring us into that heftiness of ourselves. So now we have the security and the confidence and the knowing that we really need. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just in a temporary situation. Major losses resulting from death, divorce, and other causes are usually not common occurrences. Therefore, we are generally not familiar with the thoughts and the feelings of experiencing following losses. It is inevitable that we fall back on whatever information we have learned in the past to try to deal with our responses to the conflicting feelings caused by a loss event. Throughout this book, we refer to the fact that most of us were socialized incorrectly on the topic of grief. However, there's nothing we say here is intended in any way to condemn society, anyone's parents, or any institutions. We do not believe that one generation intentionally hands down misinformation to the next. We believe that people teach what they know, which is most likely what they were taught. If you have found that the information available and the support have not been adequate in helping you recover from loss, it is not because of what's wrong with you. It's because there's a lack of correct information. If you're reading this book, it means you're open to grief. If it means you're open to beginning a process of recovery that will enhance your life rather than limit it. If you're reading this book, it's because of what's right with you. and not what's wrong. Remember that, you guys. As we're going through this week, we do have on Wednesday at 11, we have group, and that's free to everyone. And we have group on Thursdays at 4. So Wednesdays at 11, Thursdays at 4. If you can't make one, try to make the other. And remember, every Saturday at 1 p.m., we'll come back together over the next, this was week 2 out of 13 weeks. So we got 11 weeks to go, guys. Looking forward to seeing us all come into that space where we can begin processing, building the tools, and finding the way to grief recovery with one another each and every day. Blessings, love, and light. Thank you for your time. Bye for now.